This video is looking at the poem Funeral Blues by W.H. Auden. This is quite a short poem, relatively modern, so 1930s, so relatively modern by literature standards. And if you haven't already kind of either read the poem or got a copy of the poem, it's easily available online on things like Poetry Foundation. Another good thing to do is to Google Four Weddings and a Funeral and funeral blues, or Four Weddings and a Funeral poem, because a reading of this poem was featured in the mid-1990s film Four Weddings and a Funeral, and it's a very good recitation of it, so it'll give you some idea of the emotion behind it if you want to hear it read by a professional actor. Okay, so first thing as ever to do is to actually have a look at the poem itself. So just going to leave that there for a moment, and if you haven't read it, read it through to yourself and then come back to this video. Okay, so hopefully now you've read it, you've had a think about it, you've got the general gist of what's going on. So looking then at analysing it, how would we do a kind of close reading? What kind of things might we think about? So first of all, with a poem, I would always look at the title. And so I've put up here, the title, number one, expectations and connotations. So we're going to look at what the poem is leading us to believe it will be about from the title, so we can get a kind of feel of whether or not the poem delivers, whether or not it messes with our expectations, if it subverts our expectations by doing something different. Sometimes if we think about the connotations, so the connections and associations of the title, it can give us a way in which makes us make connections or enables us to make connections as we're going through. So just personally thinking about funeral blues, and do this exercise along with me or independently and then come back to the video. I start to think of funeral. We all kind of know what a funeral is. It's that service, that ceremony after a death. So I might just want to make the notes on here that we've got that connection of death, loss, and the grief that comes with it, but also the ceremonial and the kind of formal aspect of it, because the funeral is only one part of the whole grieving process. And one thing that becomes relevant in this poem is how does life go on after the funeral? Because if you think you have that kind of moment of ceremony, moment of formal demarcation of the end of someone's life, and then everybody goes home and has to deal with the fact that that person is no longer there. So that is one of the sentiments in the poem, the idea that the focus might be on the funeral, but what happens after it. We then look at blues. Obviously, we know that blue is a colour, but we also have that idea of music, right? If you sing the blues, you sing a kind of sad song reflecting upon your position, on your situation. It's also a kind of expression of emotion and grief. So here we're being led to believe that this is going to be the kind of song, the lament, almost a kind of song of sorrow or loss, to be sung at a funeral or to be presented at a funeral. And with those things in mind, we can then move to consider the story. Now, I'd always take the time to get the kind of first layer of narrative straight in your head when you're doing a poem, because if you jump straight in and start trying to look for metaphors and similes and pull them apart, you might miss bigger patterns and a bigger understanding. Never mind the fact that there might be an image in there that you just completely misinterpret because you haven't got a good grasp of the piece as a whole. So look at the story of it, and if you haven't already, take a moment to maybe be able to get into a position where you could summarise that to somebody else. Think about who's speaking, what they're talking about, what happens in the poem. So looking at my summary then, I say we have got a first person speaker. Okay, so, and they are talking from a personal perspective. Now, we don't know whether or not this is autobiographical, if we are just coming to the poem without any contextual information. If you're studying this poem for a formal exam, if it's one of your set poems and you need to bring in that context, then go and do some research on Auden, his life, his works, be able to say whether or not this poem is autobiographical or not. We're not going to go into the context here. So you've got a first person speaker who is kind of reflecting on the loss of somebody very close to them and is saying what he wants to happen, and I'm using he because Auden is male, he wants to happen as a result of this person's death or as a reaction to this person's death. And you can see generally that it starts with the kind of minutiae, if you like, of everyday life. I want to see if there's an extra I in there. I'm going to have to check the spelling of minutiae. The kind of small little details of everyday life. And then it ends up getting bigger and bigger until by the end, you're kind of talking about things on a cosmic scale. You know, you're talking about a whole world, whole universe set of orders this speaker's giving out. I also kind of noticed that this speaker is saying what he wants to happen. Okay, so there is this use of imperatives all the way through. And that's interesting, first of all, because we're going to unpick what it is that he actually wants. But it also ties in with the idea of control or loss of control. Because obviously when we lose somebody, the one thing we can't do is get them back. And so it might be that this speaker is trying to set out what he wants or what he thinks has to happen to make up for the idea that what he really wants, i.e. the person back, is not possible. So trying to reassert some sort of control. And he moves through kind of the basic message being this person was everything to me. There needs to be some kind of public recognition of the extent of my loss. And actually that spreads to the fact that there is no point in anything anymore without this person being alive. So with that in mind, if we then look at the different stanzas. So it's written in quatrains. So quatrains are 4-line stanzas. Okay, and we're not just going to point that out, but we are going to use it kind of in the first quatrain, in the second quatrain. The reader of your essay will know what a quatrain is, so you don't need to explain that it's a 4-line stanza, but you do just need to kind of drop it in as one of the ways that you're talking about the poem, so you can refer to, you know, the second quatrain, the third quatrain, etc. So we've got first quatrain, and we have straight away this kind of order, this imperative, stop all the clocks. And we have to think, you know, metaphorically, what does this mean? Because I don't think the speaker wants you to go around and take all the batteries out of the clocks or wants you to kind of go around unplugging things. It's more symbolic of a kind of bigger sentiment. So it becomes a kind of symbol for the fact that he wants time to stop. Okay, so stop all the clocks. You know, time can't carry on. The universe has to pause as a result of this person's death. Similarly, for cut off the telephone, think about what telephones represent. Communication, kind of conversation, all of that support network, maybe. So the speaker is looking for isolation, is looking for silence. So we've got kind of time stop, look for isolation. And then this line, prevent the dog from barking with a juicy bone. I think you can read it two ways, both of which kind of get to the same end. Either you prevent the dog from barking by giving it a juicy bone, or you prevent the dog from barking when it's got a juicy bone. Okay, one way or another, dogs can't really be stopped barking if they start. Okay, you might have heard the glitch on the recording before. That was because my dog started barking. But you can see that actually, you know, one way or another, this speaker is saying that those things that happen naturally, the expressions of pleasure almost by the natural world and the instinctive behaviours, will stop those as well. Silence the pianos. If we take it that, you know, a piano, we've got all of those connections of music and celebration and you know, kind of enjoyment and pleasure, as well as the idea that pianos exist to be played. You know, their purpose is to create music. So if you silence it, you take away its purpose. So it's almost as if the speaker, having lost this person, now kind of wants everything else to lose its meaning and its purpose. So let's get rid of music, let's get rid of pleasure and enjoyment. And with muffled drum, so yes, there needs to be some sort of ceremonial announcement, there needs to be some formality about, this sentiment of bring out the coffin. We get this enjambment here leading to the announcement of bring out the coffin. But the muffling kind of indicates a respect, a reverence almost, that kind of quiet, toned down respect. And even the kind of drum, like the piano, has to be kind of reined in. So we bring out the coffin, let the mourners come. And again, this instruction, it both kind of absolutely assumes that this person is going to be mourned greatly, let them arrive, let them come and show their respect. But also kind of linguistically, it might mark the speaker out from just being one of the regular mourners. He maybe sees himself as elevated beyond them because he is kind of saying, well, yes, let them come. But he is the one who's been affected most by the death in his view. If we look at how the kind of quatrain is held together, we have kind of 3 out of 4 of the lines are end stopped. We have the caesura there and there. So generally we've got these pauses after each of these imperatives, after each of the orders, saying what he wants to happen. So it gives that idea of the kind of fragmentation that could reflect grief. It's very kind of staccato, it's very kind of stop-start, this has to happen and this has to happen. Already mentioned the idea that the enjambment is here when you are building up to this inevitability of bring out the coffin. There's a sense of announcement created by that enjambment. You also have rhyming couplets here. So we've got phone, bone, drum, come. And those rhyming couplets are kind of, I suppose, ironic in the sense that this is a poem about losing somebody, about arguably no longer being part of a couple. And all of a sudden, everything about the form of the poem is saying, look, there's couples. So we've got this couplet, and there's 2 of them per quatrain, and that's repeated throughout. So the kind of very coupliness of the poem, not a technical term, don't write that in your essay. The emphasis on twos or the emphasis on pairing is emphasising to the speaker that he is no longer part of a pair. There's also quite a lot of monosyllables there, not all monosyllabic, but there is a bluntness to this poem. Stop all the clocks. This is not a poem which is using fancy Latinate, fancy complicated diction. It is a poem that's kind of using very everyday language to kind of describe that raw experience of grief. Of course, just one kind of slight aside, you have to make your mind up that this is actually talking about a death and using it in that way. There are some interpretations of this poem where it might be the kind of end of a relationship that he's using, or some other loss that he's using more metaphorically. But I think my personal kind of reading of this is it's, symbolising a death. But do play around with other interpretations you might think of or that you might come across when you're reading. So we finish that quatrain with a kind of solid end stop on that, let the mourners come. And we switch focus into the kind of idea of these public expressions of grief. And the idea of let the aeroplanes circle, moaning overhead, scribbling on the sky, the message, he is dead, has got an awful lot in it. He wants these, or he will permit these aeroplanes to roam the skies, but they are moaning. So we've got the personification of the aeroplane, and at the same time we've got the kind of onomatopoeia in it. So we get the kind of mimetic effect, the moan. Even these aeroplanes are grieving for the loss of this man. And the message that they're putting on the sky isn't a controlled announcement. It's the kind of slightly frenzied, slightly kind of uncontrolled scribbling. If you think you scribble something quickly or hurriedly, or, when there's some high emotion to it. And it's scribbling on the sky the message, he is dead. And again, that capitalisation lending kind of impact and significance to that sense of announcement. Again, you could comment on the monosyllables. It's notable that this speaker is not shying away from euphemism. Okay, euphemism, here there's no euphemism, but euphemism is where you use a softer term for one that's kind of more harsh, one that's less palatable, so one that's less kind of acceptable. So if we were trying to soften the impact of he is dead, you might say he's passed away, or, we lost him, or he's sleeping. This speaker wants to kind of, throw the brutality of what's happened at you, that monosyllabic and capitalised announcement, he is dead, that will be, festooned in the sky by these planes. Put crepe bows around the white necks of the public doves. So doves being kind of this sign of innocence and hope. You've got those biblical connotations, or the biblical allusion to the dove being, the bird that brought Noah the message back that, God had kept his promise and the flood waters were going down. So doves symbolising hope. But their white necks, they're kind of, blemish-free, clean, innocent, all of the kind of connotations that the Western culture traditionally associates with white. That is then marred by these crepe bows. So crepe was a kind of cheaper fabric that was very popular for Victorian and early 1900s mourning dress. And I mean mourning dress with a U in terms of, the dress you wore when you were mourning somebody. So he wants these, public figures, the doves that kind of wander around every day, marked with this symbol of memory or remembrance. Much like if you think today, sometimes sports people or sometimes people in the public eye will wear a black armband, pardon me, if they want to show that they're remembering an event or that they're kind of marking something. And let the traffic policeman wear black cotton gloves. Again, traffic policeman, if you look at kind of those white gloves are the other thing. So change the colour of the gloves. Even have the kind of symbol of the state, the kind of authority and order needs to recognise that this person has died. And all the things that we said about the ends stopping here, and that enjambment again is flicking round. These aeroplanes are all over the place, worth commenting on. Our form and structure is repeated, overhead, dead, doves, gloves. Now, by now, you've probably started to kind of get the impression that this poem has got some kind of beat, some sort of regularity to the metre. And it's a little bit deceptive because it's actually, you can go into the technical kind of side of it, of all the different iambs and trochees and spondes and dactyls. And if you are interested in that kind of thing, please do look at, there's a brilliant website called crossrefit.com. And within Crossrefit's menus, there is something called, Understanding How Poetry Works. And that will give you a fantastic kind of overview of the technical side of metre. But here, if you've come across sort of iambic pentameter, if you've come across sort of different forms of metre, we've got a poem that, sets itself up in iambic pentameter, but then almost immediately breaks it after the first line. And you get things like, these 4 lines. There is a stressed syllable at the start of each of these 4 lines. So, they actually, technically it opens with a dactyl, which is stressed, unstressed, stressed. There's enough kind of I suppose, sense of a beat to it, that it's got that funereal kind of march or chant or so. It's got the weight behind it. Metre-wise, you can, and if you're interested in that, look into the kind of really technical side of things. Again, if you have access to lit charts, that does quite a good technical analysis of the form and structure. But generally, kind of, you might want to comment on the kind of monosyllabic nature of some of it and where the stresses fall. So here, you've got that clear beat of the orders by the first syllable being stressed on each of those lines. We then kind of move over to the third stanza, where the narrator is trying to explain exactly what this person meant to him. Okay, and he comes up with a series of metaphors, and the metaphors are asyndectic, right? They are asyndactic listing. And that means a list where you've got commas rather than and. Use of and is polysyndactic listing or polysyndeton. So here he was my north, my south, my east and west, my working week, my Sunday rest, my noon, my midnight, my talk, my song. So you're going to talk about the cumulative effect, the building up effect of those lists, the sense that, you know, the speaker is trying to throw at you everything that this person was, and therefore by implication the significance of their loss. Look again at what's in the list. You know, you've got all of the directions. He was everything. He was all of my time. He was my working week, so he was my purpose, my drive, my profession. He was my Sunday rest. He was my faith. He was my relaxation. He was all of my time and all of my kind of celebration and activity. You've got this kind of repetition of my. It's something called diacope. There, kind of stressing that ownership, that possession. You know, he belonged to me. He was mine. Therefore, you know, I have lost him. If you can't remember diacope, just talk about the repetition of my. But it's kind of building up. He was everything to me until we get to this final line of this stanza. I thought that love would last forever, and the colon there, that's caesura. I was wrong. You know, this speaker thought he had his fairy tale ending, and then again these kind of blunt monosyllables and that end stop jump in to say, you know, it all went wrong. I was wrong. You know, I thought this was my happiness, happily ever after. It wasn't, right? And there's nothing kind of other than that kind of throwing that fact at you. It's like the he is dead. You know, I thought it would last forever. I was wrong. The kind of blunt and raw pain behind the sentiment. And so he moves from, you know, having been proved wrong, the focus of our final quatrain is this kind of almost nihilism. Okay, if you are nihilistic, think about annihilate, total destruction. Okay, nihilistic is where you kind of just think everything should be destroyed. There's no point in anything. So he goes on to this, as we said before, cosmic scale. You know, it's not just there's no point in me existing, there's no point in anything existing. So the stars are not wanted now. And then that kind of caesura, the colon there, put out everyone, you know, get rid of all of them. Pack up the moon and dismantle the sun. And if you think of all of the things that traditionally in literature, you know, the stars and the sun represent, so the heavens and value and faith and beauty and the scale of the universe, etc. It's all being eradicated, all being wiped out. You know, pack up the moon. So I don't know why I missed the moon out of that. Pack up the moon, dismantle the sun. So, you know, these huge kind of cosmic symbols, sun in terms of light and life-giving and hope, etc. Pour away the ocean, sweep up the wood. It's like all of these things, these universally kind of recognised pictures of nature and existence, are just being tidied away like they're no longer needed. Okay, so he's taking cosmic imagery and kind of reducing it to almost the everyday domestic. You know, just pack them up, dismantle them, put it all away. No use for any of it now. Because it ends on this idea, for nothing now can ever come to any good. And that emphatic kind of negatives there, you know, nothing can ever come to any good. There's no getting over this. There's no recovering from it. And the fact that that's where the poem ends, on that note of kind of lack of hope, the kind of pessimism, the suffering, it's all gone. Can't do anything about it. You're not left with any sort of idea that this is going to be something that time will heal or you will get over. It is just kind of nothing can ever come to any good. So hopefully this kind of gives you a little bit of an insight into the poem. If you are writing about it for an essay, I would try and structure your ideas in a way that pulls out patterns rather than just goes through it chronologically. Right? So you might want something about Auden's use of imperatives. You might want something about, you know, the progression of the feeling through there. You might want something about the listing, the asyndeton in there. You might want to do a paragraph on the use of form and structure and pick out the different points throughout the poem rather than kind of having to repeat yourself, if you like, as you come back to these techniques that have been used repeatedly throughout the poem. It's always a better essay if you can pick up patterns and group them together. Likewise, looking at the idea that we start with kind of fairly simple images of everyday life and we move up to this kind of nihilism about the kind of cosmic scale of everything. That we talk about public recognition and private impact. That you can kind of talk about those in different focus paragraphs, being really clear to put a topic sentence in terms of where you're going at the start of those paragraphs. Also, try and pull out kind of more than one point about the quotations you're using. We've done quite a lot of work here about different elements of different quotations, but think about the kind of sound patterns that are happening. You might want to comment on the assonance in something like muffled drum, that kind of thudding sound as you're talking about the sense of reverence. It's got that weight behind it. You might want to talk about I'm just trying to find something to go there. The monosyllables throughout. You might want to kind of pick up on, the caesura and the end stopping, contribute to or suggest that. So try and kind of collect together, and you're basically aiming to say a lot about a little each time. This is a short poem which is superficially simple, but I hope that we've given a little bit of insight into kind of what you can do with it if you unpick it a little bit more. I hope this has been useful. Okay, bye now.